Get ready to rock your style with Wicked Wanderings.
Introducing our brand new merch.
Cozy up in our Wicked hoodies.
Or flaunt your vibe in our sweet-ass t-shirt.
Join the Wicked Wanderings crew, explore the mysterious,
and head to our merch store now.
The link is in the show notes below. Stay curious, stay stylish, and keep on wanderings with Wicked Wanderings Podcast.
When I do Bigfoot, you're going to have to tell the story of what happened to you and Joe on the trail this weekend.
Ooh, yeah, do
tell. Well, it was really windy, and the trees are cracking and everything. And Joe says, oh, you want to grab a log and hit a tree and see if Bigfoot will respond?
Mm-hmm. And did he?
No, because we didn't even do it.
They weren't
and it
fun.
wasn't Bigfoot. It was the wind.
You don't know that. You don't know that.
Have you been listening to Mortal Musings with Neil and Megan?
I have.
They are hilarious.
They are.
Yeah, so just give a big old shout out to Neil and Megan.
I creeped their Instagram or Facebook, and I really want to know why he has a lot of guns and wears tactical gear.
Really?
Yeah, so if we could find that out, maybe him and I could be friends.
Oh. Huh. Do you want me to text him?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are buddies now.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. He likes to think our rhymes. Okay.
Do you like stories about haunted locations? Or maybe tales of cryptids and spooky folklore from around the world? If so, why not tune in to Haunted Escapes with Chris and Diane, where all this and more will be discussed. New episodes drop every Sunday, with visual versions the following Friday on YouTube. So why not come join us on our Haunted Escapes?
Hello, Wanderers. I'm Hannah.
And I'm Jess.
And this is Wicked Wanderings. Hello, Jess.
Hello, Hannah.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very happy to be home.
Yes, I bet.
After my travels down the East Coast.
Yes.
Today, though, we're going to talk about vampires. Ooh. Do you like vampires?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
When I think of vampires nowadays, it's like glittery in the sun and moody.
No.
Edward.
No. And I do get into Twilight a little bit because I'll be honest, Twilight got me into vampires when I was a teen. So I can appreciate what Stephanie Meyers did. I really do. But I have always loved vampires. They have always fascinated me for what kind of creature they are. Like I said, Twilight did have a big part in this, but I went beyond boys that sparkle, right? Like, I don't want them to sparkle. I want them to burn in the sun. Like, I want them to be devilish. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So I loved Van Helsing and the book, Dracula.
I've never read it.
Oh, my God. Changed my life. I read it back when I was, I think, in my early 20s. I would read it again. It's on my shelf. Very excited. So, yeah, Dracula is amazing. I loved it. I would, in our little book club, I would totally read it again. I have watched Blade and Dawn of the Dead. I loved Vampire Diaries and also True Blood.
Ooh, okay. Yes.
You love True Blood. Who doesn't love Eric?
Yes.
Right? Oh.
I don't normally go for blondes, but I definitely would go for him.
Viking, like, unholy look. Oh, my God.
Calm down, Hannah.
So, needless to say, I was very excited to do an episode on these creatures of the dark. Very excited. The lore of vampires has been around for centuries, and apparently they're dating back to the Egyptians.
Really? That far back?
I thought that was interesting, too. Cultures all seem to have men that use blood as a way to feed. And I want to look at a couple different stories surrounding New Orleans, Louisiana.
Ooh.
And the stories that sucked me in. Get it?
Get it?
Okay, come on, guys.
That's what he said.
Come on, guys.
Just kidding.
Ursuline Convent, 1727, was a place where nuns took a group of girls from France under their wing, hoping to marry them off and improve society. These girls were known as the Casket Girls because of the casket-shaped boxes they were traveling with.
Interesting.
The story goes that these girls were transporting vampires, and that while the girls were turning into vampires themselves, the men who died on the voyage died because of the vampires. Now the nuns still felt an obligation to these young women, so they sealed them in the third-floor attic with holy screws, right, probably dipped in some type of water, bolted into the shutters to keep them in. It is said on some nights the windows have popped open since the vampires are trying to get out. Now, let's look at what facts we have to back up or speculate this lore. And I did want to say that for my research, I read New Orleans Vampires, History and Legend by Marita Vovad Crandall.
Are you going to quote it?
And I quote. I will be quoting at the end. So what I really appreciated about this book was that there was a foreword that was done by Bram Stoker's great-granddaughter, who had wrote Dracula originally. So I was like, okay, this girl knows what she's talking about.
Yeah.
A man named Pierre Lemon d'Iberville, sorry, my French is lacking, founded the colony of New Orleans in 1699. He begged the French government to send him women because he needed to get these men basically settled so it could be colonized.
They just needed to get fucked. So
Basically, get them fucked, give them a meal so they come home at night. It's basically
They're
what
so
that
simple.
means. Yeah.
Food and sex,
Exactly.
you know?
Apparently, a good portion of these men were French-Canadian, and they were woodsmen, which makes sense.
Yeah, they were manly men.
Some women came on a ship, but it was not enough, so more were sent, and while they were still French, they were not what you called desirable. So all these women were French, but some were high society, some were not so high society.
I'm kind of curious what the standards were.
Not very high, because according to the book, it says some women came of their own free will, okay, with the promise of crops, friendly natives, and a comfortable life. Okay, cool.
And some dick. Sorry.
Louisiana was depicted as a paradise of sorts, but others were kidnapped and forced, bound in chains to the New World, and some this happened to them because of crimes such as murder, prostitution, and thievery.
So early human trafficking.
Basically, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep. Some of them had gonorrhea or other diseases.
I mean, who doesn't? Am I right?
And hence in the lore,
Sorry. I'm shutting up now. I'm listening.
You don't have to shut. That's the whole point of a podcast. Hence, in the lore, there was talk of much death. So it may not been because of the vampires. It could have been because the gonorrhea that was untreated, or syphilis, and, went to their brain and died.
Yeah. I wonder if gonorrhea blood had different taste to the vampires.
Yes. I mean, really?
These are all things to consider.
If you watch either True Blood or Vampires, the blood tasted different depending on if you had a disease. So
kind of like pineapple.
True. Pineapple?
Nothing. Let's continue.
What is pineapple?
If you know, you know.
Obviously, it was not working to just send anyone, so they sent the ship of Casket Girls. These girls were most likely orphans, and they were filles du cassette, meaning girls with small dowries or valuables. But when the people heard cassette, they thought casket, and so the story starts unfolding.
Oh, okay.
These girls were actually in Louisiana before the Ursuline nuns had their home built. It wasn't completed until 1734. This is what I really appreciated about Marita, was that she kind of went into the history of it and was like, okay, how can I explain this? And since these were cloistered nuns, when they transferred to their new home, they should have done it in a manner so they were covered. These nuns marched to their new convent with their students in front of them because they were teachers, and with only some of the highest nuns under canopies, which was kind of unheard of at the time. So they had some of the higher nuns with the canopies. They had their students in front of them, but they actually were allowed to be seen. They were kind of I don't know, feminine of sorts. Now, this is also where the legend could keep going, because the nuns could have easily covered coffins hiding the vampires. But there still remains the question, why is the third floor bolted shut? The attic was arranged to house orphans as well as storage. There was also another room that was all brick, so it was easier to clean because they housed the insane. The room had a Dutch door so that items could be passed through, but the nuns had no fear of being hurt. So I'm picturing, I guess I really don't understand what a Dutch door is, but I'm thinking one that's cut in half.
Maybe.
Is that a Dutch door? Yeah, Rob's nodding his head yes, so I'm going to assume yes. Even though the legend can be explained away by facts, it is still interesting that if a hinge is blown or unbolted, they fix it right away, and people have seen peering eyes from the third floor. So even though the timeline was off, right? Mm-hmm. Even though they said, okay, these nuns are about teaching and helping the women of society, and that they did try to help the insane, there is still this lore around why is the attic bolted shut and people are seeing peering eyes out of the third floor. I appreciate that she was trying to give facts around it, but there's still that mysteriousness about it.
Yeah. Like, why? If that's not the case, why is it bolted shut?
Well, I did end up calling my brother about this because I had a couple questions just because he's brilliant when it comes to history. And I texted him later and I was like, I need to go to New Orleans. Like, I need to go. I know it's going to be hot, but I can deal.
So basically, that's trip number 10 that we have planned with Jonathan.
Probably. Or Johnny.
We're just voluntelling him.
Voluntelling. The author, Voivod Crandall, and the reason I'm saying Voivod is because even though it's spelled Woywod, she said that's how it's pronounced. So, said the legend can happen with the correct facts. Her story goes like this. The Casket Girls did travel from France to New Orleans with Sister Gertrude. Sister Gertrude was also traveling with a very dangerous vampire. Okay? Sister Gertrude kept these girls under lock and key to keep their virtue, but was also to keep the vampire at bay. People died, and the girls were weak, which happens on voyages such as these, but this could have been because the vampire had been feasting on them the whole trip. Because as we know, vampires don't eat all your blood, right?
They don't?
Okay, they don't. Upon arrival to New Orleans, the girls were vampires. They already turned. They found vagrants and prostitutes to eat, and Sister Gertrude was sent back to France. Now, I think of Sister Gertrude, by the way, as the principal that's in Matilda.
It's been years since I've seen that.
Oh, my God.
Miss Trunchbull.
Yes, Trunchbull. Yes, that's how I picture Sister Gertrude as.
Ew. Yeah, she's woo.
The king found out what Sister Gertrude did and sent her back to New Orleans, but he sent her back as a cat. For her eternal damnation would be to rally the Casket Girls, give them to the nuns to hide, and find rats around the city for the girls to eat, because that's what cats do. They like mice, right? The attic was then used as a way to educate them, but also keep them away from people, and Sister Gertrude can still be seen as a black cat circling the property.
Cats are evil, so it would make sense.
I know, I don't like cats. I'm definitely a dog person. Like, look at Devin.
Kenzie, girl.
Kenzie
So
needs to be the
precious.
mascot of Wicked Wanderings.
She does. We should put her on a hoodie.
By the way, I am asking Rob Wanderers to do dog jackets for Wicked Wanderings.
Oh, yes.
Come on.
They could promote us.
They could.
I mean, and how many people would... I mean, I would buy a dog jacket over...
Like, you have, what, 3 dogs?
I have 2.
Why do I think you have 3?
I mean,
Oh, Dave, right. Sorry, Dave.
that's funny.
1903, New Orleans. A new man is in town, Jacques Saint-Germain. This man is known for his lavish parties, and he was quite a socialite. He frequented clubs and often had women on his arm. He loved to tell stories of his travels across the world. He told people he was a direct descendant of Count Saint-Germain, who was a friend and servant of King Louis XV. Rumors started spreading that he looked so much like his ancestor, and Jacques did not change people's minds. The parties he hosted were always catered, including the dining ware, which was odd because back then the plates and utensils were a sign of your wealth and family name because they would have them actually like engraved. Another odd thing was he never ate during his dinners. He loved to watch people enjoy themselves while drinking what looked like red wine. Several months after his arrival, a woman jumped from his balcony claiming she had been bitten by a vampire. She was rumored to be a prostitute, and the police told Jacques, "Don't worry, come in the morning. It's too late for you to come down now to do a statement." He never showed, and when they entered his home, it seemed he had vanished and left most of his belongings. The officer found open but corked wine bottles with a mixture of wine and human blood. He was never seen again. Now,
Time to move on.
let's talk about Count Saint-Germain, who he was supposedly looked like. We aren't exactly sure about his true origins, but he was likely born in Bohemia to a prince and princess and then was given to the care of a Medici.
What's that?
Oh, girl, you don't know the Medici family from Italy?
No.
Oh my God, part of me wants to call John and say what the Medicis are about.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi, John.
Do you have time for one question?
Yeah, sure. What's the topic?
So I'm doing my vampire episode, and I brought up how that Count Saint-Germain was given to the Medici family, and Jess is like, what's that? And she has no idea who the Medici family is. So I didn't know if you could give us maybe a 1-minute spiel on who they are.
Yeah. So really quick, Medici family were a very powerful family in Italy. Think late Middle Ages through the Renaissance. Their headquarters were in Florence, but as they grew in terms of the scope of their power, fueled by the wealth that they garnered from their loans and their banking enterprises, they began moving in more political circles. Eventually, they were named the Dukes of Tuscany, later the Grand Dukes of Tuscany. And we have to remember that this is a period of time where Italy is not a country. It's basically just a peninsula made up of multiple different smaller kingdoms. So they became eventually the Grand Dukes of Tuscany. Think of it as the local highest level of authority for the area of Tuscany in Italy. They did extraordinarily well in increasing their influence over courts of Europe by marrying, either having daughters of other courts of Europe marry their sons, or having their daughters marry into other courts. So some of the most famous are Catherine de' Medici, who later became Queen of France. Marie de' Medici, who also became Queen of France at a later generation. They had multiple popes in the family. They're kind of interconnected with most of the major ruling houses. One Medici daughter married into the Habsburgs, and so they're really an extraordinary family. Now, the gentleman that you're talking about was the last Grand Duke of Tuscany. Hannah, remind me of his name.
Count de Saint-Germain.
No, that was his ward. Gian Gaston was the last of the Medicis in this sort of respect. So he was the last Grand Duke of Tuscany from the Medici family. And then later, the House of Lorraine took over the Dukedom of Tuscany. So John de Gaston, the last Grand Duke of Tuscany, was he basically took, and this was not unusual in this time, but he took over the education of Saint-Germain.
And Johnny,
if that story is true.
And Johnny, also, we talked about Catherine de' Medici. She was also involved with Mary Queen of Scots because it was her son that was married to Mary Queen of Scots for a while, correct?
I think you're right about that.
Okay. I feel like the Medicis are just as big as the Romanovs. They have such a big part of history. So Johnny, thank you. I'm sorry if we caught you off guard, but I was like, John can say it better than I can.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. This made my day, so thank you.
Yay! Well,
you always know so much. Yes.
He's so smart.
We need you back.
We do need you back.
I mean, I literally just came back a couple of weeks ago from Italy, and the whole time we were in Florence, it was all Medici this and Medici that. And when I was young, I think it was 7, I read the foundational book called The Rise and Fall of the House of Medici, which is so well worth reading. It's a little bit, in some places it can be a little misogynistic. It's an older book. Some places it's very homophobic. Again, it's a much older book. But it's the foundations of where did the Medici family come from and how did they rise to power, and then where did the power and the money go at the very end. And the very end of it is all about John Gaston, who took over the education of the Count Saint-Germain. If, again, that story is true, is that story about Saint-Germain speculated.
But can we be honest? What 7-year-old is reading about the rise and the fall of the Medici family?
I think there's some of us out there, but
and lobotomies.
I was the only one that
lobotomies. That's true.
Yeah.
So, John, you were I remember when we were talking when I was writing this episode originally, because that is something I brought up in the podcast about how I had to call you and talk to you about certain things, like about how they had their names inscribed on silverware and how it was very odd that the Count Saint-Germain didn't have that kind of thing. Anyways, especially since his family was supposedly so big, you had mentioned about how the person in the Medici family that took care of Saint-Germain was probably part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Oh yeah, that was the last Medici Grand Duke of Tuscany, young Gaston.
Yes, and I just thought it was interesting because when you were mentioning the book that you read, very very anti-gay and everything, I just thought it was interesting that you had brought that up to me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
A sincere expression of gratitude to our esteemed patrons, Lynn from Massachusetts, Heather from New Jersey, Courtney from Massachusetts, Amber from Idaho, and Chelsea from Utah, for their generous monthly contributions. Their support fuels the engine of our investigative endeavors here at Wicked Wanderings.
You too can become a valued patron and unlock a realm of exclusive content by supporting our mission for as little as $3 a month. Your contribution sustains our commitment to delivering high-quality content.
Visit wickedwanderingspodcast.com and click on the support tab to join the ranks of dedicated patrons like Lynn, Heather, Amber, Courtney, and Chelsea. Your investment not only keeps our podcast thriving, but also ensures you are at the forefront of intriguing discoveries.
Thank you for considering this opportunity to deepen your engagement with Wicked Wanderings. Your support is paramount in enabling us to continue our journey into the realms of mystery and true crime. And now, back to the shit show.
Yeah, so it's very well known that I'm just going to call him Gaston because that's a little easier than Jean, but was a very flagrant homosexual at a time where you really couldn't be. He basically hated his wife and his wife hated him. They lived for a long time, I think, in Northern Europe somewhere. I don't know enough about that, but she didn't want to come back to Tuscany, and he did. And there was a lot of fighting going on during their marriage. They never had any children, which ended the line for the Medicis in terms of ruling Tuscany. But he lived in some extraordinary splendor at a Renaissance palace called the Pitti Palace, which is would have been considered kind of at the outskirts of Florence, but is now very much part of Florence. It was one of the places that I had to go see when we were in Florence, and it's extraordinary. But there's all of these interesting stories about his lover, and this feels like its own episode. But and then by the time that John got older and the lover got older, the lover would basically be a pimp, finding younger, very handsome men to entertain the Grand Duke in his ailing years, and they used to like run rampant through the palace and spend all sorts of money and steal things and break things, and people would say like that was the alternative court because he wouldn't keep a court of like other nobles around him, which was part of the course. He would just keep all these very handsome young men and let them do whatever they wanted. So really interesting character. But I feel like that, great queers of history could be its own episode. It's not weird. It's a little weird, but it's not wicked. So.
Well, I thank you. I'm sorry I caught you so off guard with this, but I knew you could explain it really well.
No worries. And
yes,
it is
thank you.
I'm going to go back to spreadsheets, but so good to hear from all of you.
All right. We love you. We'll talk to you
miss
later.
you.
Love you all. Bye.
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 He was also known to tell great tales about conversations with Cleopatra and Queen of Sheba. When talking at his parties, he would not eat and enjoy watching others enjoy his food. Since he had much wealth, having monogrammed utensils would have been something for him, but he went by many names, so he may not have had them done because it would have been hard to pick, which I thought was interesting.
You should have just put the whole alphabet.
Upon his death, you would think he would be the type of guy to have a lavish ceremony and burial, but he had nothing to his name, only some everyday items. Was this a way for him to start again in an inconspicuous way?
I mean, I'm sure.
1932, a young girl breaks free from her captors, the Carter brothers. When the police arrived, they found other victims tied to chairs with wounds on their wrists where they were sliced open. The police waited for the brothers, and they were caught apparently asking the police for death. During this time, if the brothers were vampires, they went from roaring 20s to the Great Depression. People went from being everywhere to being nowhere. Kind of like
they
the
were
pandemic.
starving.
One place that would be good for a vampire to frequent would be the barbershop. The barbershop was known for bad hair follicles to cleaning open wounds to broken bones, which I didn't know this. This is why the barber pole has red and white, so people know they can have their blood let, which was sometimes done with leeches. The blue was apparently added later in the States for patriotism. Of course.
America. Fuck
America.
yeah.
With this, vampires could get blood without harming anyone, but with the change in what barbershops do, blood has become less scarce in the no harm department. It was said the brothers were killed most likely by hanging for being serial killers and placed in the plot for those whose bodies had no family. In these plots, after a year and a day, it is said the body is mostly decomposed, so whatever is left over, they take a pole and swirl it all together and push it to the back. Supposedly, this is where the saying, "I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole" comes from.
Interesting.
Yes. So they push all the remains to the back so they can add someone else. When it came time to push the brothers' remains back, they weren't there. And it is said that the brothers are seen in a balcony overlooking the people of New Orleans for their next victim.
Creepy.
Creepy. The culture of vampires has changed dramatically over the centuries. From being silly pamphlet stories of gross creatures to the now sensual, desirable, yet dangerous Eric from True Blood.
Yummy.
Around 5,000 individuals identify as vampires in the United States and have people that donate their blood for reasons such as it's a good friend or they think they need it and they want to give it as a sexual favor.
Oh, God.
So I am going to read part of a story and I am going to quote, and here I quote. So the author of the book, she has what she calls a boutique in New Orleans and also kind of like a vampire bar that she's in charge of in New Orleans. And she had this really strange experience. And you just can't not say it the way she wants you to say it. So basically she's pouring wax to make these candles. And the first place that they had was like down this really weird like hallway into a building and up these stairs. So it's not like something you could easily see from the road. And she also had this dog she called Elks who like would alert her if someone was coming in because her back was turned. She couldn't see anybody. So she saw this man come in and he had this like walking cane. So she mentions that he looked Greek or Italian, but she said then he appeared to be what she would consider Romanian. His cane was elaborate, an ornate silver handle was attached to a lovely wooden stick, and he maneuvered about the room with grace. And then he asked her, "Do you have the history of the vampire?" She says, "I was so pleased that he finally spoke, and I almost knew what he would sound like before any words had come out of his mouth. He spoke what sounded like a Romanian accent. Not put on by any means, but a true accent. He did not care if I noticed or not." And then she mentioned, like, we don't have that book. We only have authors that we can get signatures for. And then he says, "I know people who would be very interested in this." At that point, I started to talk, but I have no idea what I was saying. I was probably trying to take his comment as a compliment, thinking he was pleased by what he saw. I was trying to smooth things between us over, as I felt he didn't care for me one bit. I didn't really think he was happy with the items in my shop at all. I think he was intrigued with the idea of the shop in general. Had he been a vampire, he might have considered it a compliment to himself. So then she goes on to say that he doesn't buy anything. He walks back through the door, and where she was standing, she could see the street, and she saw that her now husband was walking into the shop. She was like, great, he'll run into them, like he'll know what I'm talking about. So the soon-to-be husband comes in, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, did you just see that guy that left?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "There was this man that came in and he looked like this with a cane." And he was like, "There was no one that came through the shop. I don't know what you're talking about." So she was saying like, "I have a feeling I'm going to see this person again. And I think he was a vampire."
Or a ghost.
Or a ghost. But I just thought it was such a cool story.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good ending.
That is a very good ending. Thanks, Hannah. That was very interesting.
I hope it
and
was.
Jonathan, even
And
though he's not here.
For taking a phone call last notice, poor thing. He was very caught off guard.
Yeah, gotta keep it exciting, I suppose.
All right, Wanderers. Thank you.
Don't get your blood sucked.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today. This show wouldn't be possible without our amazing producer and editor, Rob Fitzpatrick, who works tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you the best content.
And a special thanks to Taiga Soundprod for providing the captivating intro music. Cinematic Intro 24.
And of course, we can't forget the hauntingly beautiful outro music, Rhino's Theme, composed by Kevin MacLeod.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platforms, like Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Your feedback means the world to us.
Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram for behind-the-scenes glimpses, updates, and more thrilling content. You can find us at Wicked Wanderings Podcast.
Thank you so much for listening and being part of our Wicked Wanderings community. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Stay curious,
Keep exploring,
and always remember to keep on wandering.